Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, my friend Kirstie Seabourne. So Kirstie is an expert in embodiment as it relates to parenting and children, particularly in regards to trauma, special educational needs. She's got a background in dance, leadership embodiment, various kinds of trauma work, qualified teacher, master's degree from the Laban Center, Bowen therapist. I mean, there's a lot here we can get into. So Kirstie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Mark.
Pleasure. Nice to see you, even though you're just around the corner from me in Brighton. We don't get to talk as much as I'd like. So it's
No,
good.
we don't.
Hi. How did you get into this? What was the beginning of your story?
Well, I can't remember a time when I was not moving and dancing. I was one of those children who was probably dancing before I could walk, certainly before I could skip. Which I've got slight regrets about. I think I was probably skipping with pointing my toes before actually, getting a sense of what that was like to really move in my body. And so a long time teaching movement and dance and physical theatre, working with bodies in different ways. But as I was saying to someone the other day, there's this difference between being the kinesthetic, skilled mover and being an embodied person. So My two journeys were actually quite separate. It's taken me much, much longer to inch my way to being, towards a kind of conscious embodiment within myself.
Yes, so someone can be skilled as a footballer or a ballet dancer, but disembodied in the sense that they can move their body, but they're not necessarily feeling their body or understanding how it relates to them as a person.
Yeah, I think, when I reflect back even on my childhood, it was like kind of having two bodies. There was my dancing body, where there was a place that I was connected to my self-expression and my joy and a confidence and an ability to be on stage and have people's gaze at me and really enjoy that. And then there was my kind of ordinary everyday body, which was very self-conscious and timid. It took a long time for those two things to start coming together. It kind of merged a little bit more when I was doing vocational dance training. It was in the 80s. There was, it was around the time where the intelligent dancer was starting to emerge a little bit from being a kind of choreographer's tool to actually this idea that the dancer could be intelligent and part of the co-creation process. So that was a really interesting time. It was a time that the somatic movement modalities of things like body-mind centering and Feldenkrais and continuum were starting to influence the dance classes.
Just to jump in there, because how influential are they today? So if you were to go to, say, I don't know, one of the dance schools in London, like The Place or Laban or whatever, like how kind of somatic are they and how sort of just pure body as performance are they?
I think they have moved much, much more into the somatic piece, much more than from I know it was a really good time that I was there to be able to start experiencing that, but it was still at that cusp. But I think, much, much more these days. It's towards the somatic, it's towards the healthy dancer and towards sustainability. So how can that dancer sustain themselves over a period of time rather than have that shorter life?
Yeah, because like footballers, they could have a sort of, a career that could be quite short. And there's actually an organisation in the UK for sort of retired dancers. And they contacted us and they were saying, hey, can you do a discount for old dancers to come to EFC, which is, the Embodied Facilitator course, because it's a good way to them to continue their career in corporate as you have, And we were, when I said old dancers, I thought they were sort of 60, 70, 80, and what they meant was sort of 30 plus.
Yeah.
That's what they meant. And there's some of them were like, okay, that's the end of my dance career at 30, 35. And now they were looking to sort of work in business or do other things. And that's why they were contacting us. And I was like, wow, that's quite a different reality. Because in business training, if you're under 30, you're sort of almost considered too young for it. So different perspective.
Yeah, exactly. So after, so coming out from that, and I moved a lot into teaching. I was an academic course leader in further and higher education for a long time. And as part of that, I was seeing, you know, corporate clients for presentation skills, the kind of the performance skill piece. And I'd also started, I wanted to work with bodies in a different way. So I started doing body work. And that's when I started to get quite interested in this thing of people would come off the bodywork table and they would be like really in their length. They would be feeling magnificent, and they would come back the following week and they would say, you know, I was able to have that conversation I was never able to have with my partner before. I was able to do this different thing. I was suddenly had the courage, or, you know, a different potential to take different actions. So I was really interested in that, partly because it wasn't sustainable. You know, it was that kind of a comeback. By the time they'd come back to me, they were starting to feel a little bit, you know, contracted and back into themselves again. So that led me to America, to Richard Strozi's bodywork stuff, which then took me on to the leadership embodiment work, and exploring somatic trauma therapy with Babette Rothschild and other people, because I really wanted, although I wasn't working with trauma, and, you know, I don't still work explicitly with trauma now as a therapist, you know, I want to be really clear around, you know, what my boundaries are and how I can support it, because any time that we're working with the body, as you know, there's that potential for that something deeper to emerge.
Yes. There's a difference between being trauma-informed or trauma-educated and then being a trauma therapist as well, right? Like, I just regard it as being responsible. Anyone I feel to be trauma-informed, but that, you know, like me, I'm not a trauma therapist.
No. And then it was kind of lucky that I did do some of the therapy work and attachment work, because I also, over that time, I was a foster carer, and I eventually went on to become an adoptive mum. I have a birth daughter as well. She's a grown-up. So I became an adoptive mum to my young man, who's 12 now. And that is really where my life took a totally different direction.
Right.
I was also working as a university mental health mentor at that time as well. But that took me into this very interesting journey with, you know, really switching from believing that I was this calm, secure, confident, skillful parent, to very quickly becoming powerless and helpless and rageful. I didn't know I had that much rage in me, and shame that was coming up, and feeling that, you know, I'm really not a good enough parent for this child. It doesn't matter how hard I try, or you know, how much I love, it isn't enough for this child. So that was quite interesting for me. So a lot of the work that I was doing, lots and lots of training around attachment, around relational trauma, that was all really supportive, and very, very lucky of having a brilliantly supportive social worker as well, and some support systems, which was great. And I know a lot of people don't have that luxury. But it was actually the leadership embodiment work of Wendy Palmer that was the most transformative piece for me in terms of, you know, me and my relationship with my child. So that's the reason it was Wendy's work I decided to start kind of orientating my work around, and bringing all that trauma parenting piece in as well. Because what was happening was I was going around, you know, other people's workshops, attachment workshops, and a lot of the therapeutic parenting, it's all around the importance of being an open, engaged, it's called pace parenting, call it playful, attuned, curious, and empathetic. soft eyes, soft voice, all those things in order to support you to be a safe parent and to build the trust that these children need. And then I'd be looking around the room and seeing frozen faces and spun out eyes and extremely stressed out parents who would be and always coming out saying, we know these things. It doesn't matter how many times they're being told it. Of course, we don't do any of our parenting when we're sitting on the, not most of it when we're sitting on the yoga mat or in a classroom. It is a full-on, messy, visceral, emotional experience. And it's when our children push on us, that's when our attachment and our survival systems get activated. And of course, it's the body that holds the charge. So, they'd be coming out saying, I know this stuff, but as soon as I come out of the workshop, and I get put under pressure, my child spits at me or swears at me or whatever they're doing. And obviously, as we all know doing the work that we do, the all that good stuff goes out of the window. So
so let me, if I could jump in and sort of recap here. So you'd done some work as a dancer, started getting into trauma, different things. Then, you had this, excuse me if I use terminology that's not kind of PC, but a kind of challenging child, a child that had different behavioral issues that were like, wow, this is really hardcore. Some of the behaviors we'll talk about as well. Yeah. And then you went, hang on a minute, I've learned all this leadership embodiment work from Wendy and others. This could be really useful. Mm-hmm. And because, as you say, you could read a book on parenting or go to a seminar, but then that's a cognitive thing. And then it's like when you're actually with children, and I can't speak from the position of a parent, but I've worked with about 50,000 children in about 20 countries. So I can talk from the position of just working with children that, it can be really triggering. And all of a sudden we're not in the smart part of our brain that knows the empathic theory of, Rogerian, whatever, is just not being used. We're in a fight flight response. We're doing things that we know even aren't smart because there's training and conditioning there. Yeah,
exactly. And there was this, beautiful piece of work with Wendy that was just supporting all those other pieces that I knew so well. And so that's why a few years ago Embodied Parenting emerged, because it was kind of an imperative that it did, really. So that brings me to the work that I do now.
And if I may, because there's a surprisingly small amount on embodiment parenting. Now, it's partly I'm not looking for it as someone who isn't a parent yet. But, for example, my sister's having some issues with my niece, and I kind of was looking for things to point her to, and there's not that much out there considering other subjects. Do you know what I mean? Like there's loads on sexuality, for example, in our field, and we've had all these tantra teachers on. And it's like, well, the sex does make babies sometimes, like.
And I mean, that's another thing. And at some point, I'd really like to be bringing some of that work into it as well, as the whole idea about sensuality and sexuality and how we talk to our children about that. But no, I think I did a search recently, and there was a lot more search terms on embodied parenting, whereas I think about 5-6 years ago, I was the first one that was using that term. And also it's what I notice about it a lot, which is also why I wanted to do embodied parent education, because I couldn't relate to any of the other parenting stuff that was up. It either it's either therapeutic counselling type work for us parents, or it was, lovely conscious parenting with pictures of children, skipping with their mums through the daisies.
You were getting bitten and spat at.
Getting bitten, spat at, called the most revolting names, or, you could
just to give so I know a little bit about your personal context, but I know some listeners won't. So you've mothered a child who's now an adult, and she had sort of very few behavioural issues, as I understand it.
No, she's just been an absolute beauty, an absolute dream.
So you had. Again, one sort of normal one, inverted commas, and you adopted, and then you've adopted a child, and this child has some serious stuff going on, right? So God love them, and I know you love them to bits, but not easy. Could you give a couple of examples, just so, because you've told me these over the years, and I was a bit shocked by some of them. So just for listeners to sort of get a sense of some of the situations where you've been developing this work?
With a lot, it emerged. We obviously didn't necessarily, he was quite young when we fostered first and then adopted him, and he was quite young. So a lot of this was starting to kind of, it took a while to figure out what we were working with. And a lot of the behaviours were assigned to attachment to start with, but what we know now is actually it's permanent long-term brain damage due to fetal alcohol syndrome. So, and that's when it does start getting tricky, because there's much less capacity for kind of neuroplasticity in the brain. So there can be very impulsive, real kind of flash anger situations. And with my chap, it's kind of mixed with attachment stuff as well. And so it can be very, very rejecting. It doesn't matter, so the idea of being playful, that sounds great, but actually, their need to be in control can be so extreme that any offer to play, even if it's fun, it's nice, will be rejected.
Right.
So how do you keep your eyes shining in the face of all that distress? How do you keep yourself playful when you're being rejected the whole time? There's all that piece. And it's common sometimes to have quite extreme behaviors of, being attached with knives or definitely, spat at, appalling language all the time. He can be very abusive sometimes outside of the house and swearing and he can be quite violent and quite aggressive.
Yeah.
And also extremely loving and extremely gorgeous and extremely wonderful.
Yeah.
But that early attachment trauma can be quite harmful to development processes in the brain. So it can take a lot longer for the kind of regulation system and the impulse control and things like that to come on board. It doesn't mean that it won't. It just takes a lot longer and a lot more patience. Yeah.
So, the violent piece, the violent children, I did some research for a family member of mine not long ago, and this is way more common than people think, actually, isn't it? Like violent children.
It is.
I used to swear at my mum as well. Like, Mum, if you're out there, sorry. But never violent. And, that is more common than people think. And
it is. And particularly in the foster adopting world, the statistics are really quite high.
Now, there's a sort of self-defense side of that, which maybe we won't go into here. But there's also, the piece I'm hearing to you about wanting to be loved and feeling, I've heard parents talk about feeling like a failure and like, hey, wanting to connect. And there's actually emotional needs on both sides there, right?
Yes, there are. Yeah, exactly. And also that's why I do a lot of work around compassion fatigue, or what we call blocked care in the industry, because it's a two-way street. Attachment is a two-way street, and there's the whole chemicals in the brain. And we think, a lot of the children, when they're coming to us, we haven't necessarily had that lovely, yummy gaze in the eyes, oxytocin coming into the system, the dopamine, all those sorts of things. So trying to sort of sustain compassionate care over the long term is quite tricky to do when you're not getting, it's a reciprocal co-creative process, the attachment process.
Well, it's, in a way, parenting is a sort of incredibly hard job that you can't really walk away from, or it's certainly very difficult to walk away from. Like, you wouldn't be fostering if you couldn't, but it's very difficult, and it's potentially almost like being in an abusive relationship, right? A lot of parents to me look like they have Stockholm syndrome. Like there's this person that's kind of abusive to them who they sort of have to stay with.
Yeah.
That was if this was an intimate partner treating you this way, you'd be out the door, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
That's kind of, and of course I'm being slightly silly here. I'm presenting it from one side, but I think maybe people they present it from that point of view.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, so that's why it becomes important for us to be able to one of the things is to be able to experience ourselves differently, as powerful and resourceful, and able to take, and that's one of the key things I think is so important for embodied parenting is, trust that you can take compassionate, protective action in the moment, because that feeds into our own sense of safety and dignity as well.
There's the power as well as the love side, isn't there? To use Paul Lingdon's kind of two sides. Like there's all the like be open and be listening and be empathic and nonviolent communication and all that. But there's also about the stuff around boundaries and firmness and, you know, right up to the physical level of being able to look after yourself.
Yeah. And we have to be able to put those boundaries and limit settings with, you know, still that kind of open, gentle, compassionate care. Particularly because you know, a lot of children are very hypersensitive to threat and you know, just our overall sense of presence. So being able to train our nervous systems to be able to take, you know, skillful, effective action, because once we know that we can do that in the moment, then our own nervous systems can start to relax. And so this is what we're looking at. And this is where I get in about the calm parenting. I've really started to try and get that word out of my vocabulary now. Because when we're talking about calm parenting, it brings this sense that we're in this kind of Zen flat line,
right?
You know, you're calm, you know, this kind of stuff. When what we're really talking about is regulated, safe, authentic parenting. Rather than
Zen the whole time, and in real life, you know, and this isn't just for parents or people that have very difficult children, right? Is it? I mean, I was talking to Jane the other day. She was teaching embodied parenting on the course Fididas is leading at the moment, and she was saying, like, look, basically children don't self-regulate very well. They push all your buttons psychodynamically. It's incessant. It doesn't stop. You may be under-resourced and tired, so it's not once for an hour in a yoga class, it's all day. You know, she's a single mother, so she's got that on top. She has no one else taking the pressure off at all. And you know, this incessant constant testing of her own ability to center and state regulate, but also effectively any parent is self-regulating for a second nervous system, even without any special needs. Yes,
they are, which is also one of my issues around this push towards self-regulation, teaching self-regulation to children in schools, because we learn regulation by being with another regulated body.
We learn socially, right? That's a socially taught thing, which is why people that have parents who are drug addicts or crazy or whatever, it's difficult for them to learn that, because even if they were learning it in school or they went to child yoga classes, their nervous system is implicitly learning rather than explicitly learning for hours every day with the agitated, stressed parent.
That's right, yeah. And we're internalizing that. And hopefully what we are internalizing is that sense to be able to, co-regulate, which can eventually learn to into self-regulation. But it's the safety of the relationships and the environment around us that allows us to, let go of our defense structures and be able to get into that exploratory, orientating place. It's not... my worry about doing all this kind of, get our children to do 3 deep breaths, teach them these exercises, is that, often that can push them into kind of like a faux window of tolerance where, they're looking like they're getting calm on the top, but underneath they're still spinning. Because if we're also not giving them the environment and enough nourishing adult co-regulating, that doesn't disappear. We need that as we go through our lifetime. We're using that. It's like, why are we wanting our children to be self-regulating?
That's what's making them need that. So and this is really important, isn't it? I want to bring this to anyone who's listening who might not be a parent. These are actually the same basic rules of, I'd say, good embodied training generally, right? In that, first of all, we're all co-regulating each other. Like, when I sleep next to my wife, she's usually a bit calmer than I am as a person, and she just kind of, I always wake up the next morning in days when she's there a little bit calmer than days when I'm in a hotel on my own teaching somewhere, just because her nervous system's just a bit calmer than mine, because she didn't have an abuse background, isn't an alcoholic, doesn't live at the same pace of life that I do with my business. You know, she's just a bit more of a chill cat than I am. So it's like she's actually regulating me unconsciously just by sleeping next to me, you know.
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah.
And then when we hang out, even more so maybe, you know, consciously. So we're all regulating each other the whole time. And, you know, I might be up-regulating her in a positive way too, hopefully. But it's also, you know, these are also the basis of good embodied training, right? People are feeling basically safe. There's some sense of being seen, of being loved. You know, this is the necessary conditions of a therapist will be going, okay, this is the therapeutic conditions, but also hopefully a good yoga teacher listening to this is going, okay, this is what people need to feel in order to go deep in a yoga class. These are the same basic conditions. They're just a little bit more extreme and magnified in your case, right?
It's just on the spectrum. So we're just kind of like try and learn it in a faster way. But yeah, no, it is on the spectrum, and it brings in all the issues around self-care as well, because as we're talking about, as you're talking about that, and this sort of idea about self-regulation and co-regulation, it's the same with the obsession about self-care and the fact that we need to do self-care. It's like, well, what's wrong with collective care? Because actually, I can. It's not necessary. The compassion fatigue sometimes for me is not about the activity with my child. I can come up, you know, I can access all sorts of deep resources within myself if I think I'm doing a meaningful job. You know, if I think that people respect what I do, if I feel significant, and if I feel that there is other people caring for me. I can't care for others if I don't.
We're inter-resilient is how I put this. We're not. This idea of resilience comes from a sort of American hyper-individualistic culture of the one person who knows how to do a breathing exercise and has a fucking bubble bath at the end of every day. Now, I love a bubble bath, but I'm not imagining I'll have uninterrupted bubble baths when I have children. Do you know what I mean? I'm not imagining that will be, I'll have 2 hours in the morning to do meditation, you know?
Yeah. And I would, you know, I'd have a bubble bath at the end of the day and I'd just be soaking in shame that had come up in the day. You know, so it's also about, so there's the piece around changing our perceptions about, you know, the more that we understand what's going on with the body and the brain with our children, you know, the more we can be perceptive about the driving force underneath their behaviours.
Right.
And we can be more influential with our interventions. But
so knowing that you can't, in the same way as you can't rationally calm someone down who's drunk, who's going to fight someone, you're not going to cognitively talk to a 2-year-old and explain to them why they can't have another cookie when they're having a tantrum.
No.
And that cognitive intervention of explaining rationally is probably not going to be very helpful.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, also earlier you really talked about the why of embodiment. I think this subject brings it out beautifully. Like, why won't the parenting workshop or the book or the podcast or whatever, why won't listening to this podcast be enough for people? Well, because they're not training their own nervous system. I mean, being aware of how nervous systems work is incredibly useful, as you say, but then there's also the training part of this, right?
Yeah. The embodied learning piece is so important, and that is the missing piece in not just in parenting, but in most things. The embodied learning is. You know, other forms of learning tend to be informative, whereas I think about the embodied learning piece to be transformative, because, you know, when we are just receiving that information as it's being imparted to us in a normal, traditional, conventional way, it's not challenging my beliefs or my, you know, way of thinking about stuff, or it's not bringing up my blind spots and all those things that I don't know about myself, which when we're put into that embodied learning piece, when we're doing relationship work with each other, then those things can be, you know, made explicit, and, you know, we can then we can sort of and then practice what it is and start to understand there are, you know, it brings up different potentials, different possibilities that we might not even have thought of before. I had a woman, it was in a workshop in LA this year, and we were doing an exercise, and she said to me, my son comes towards me and it is like a steam train. And it's really scary because he's being quite full on, he's being quite scary, he's swearing at me. And I just freeze. And that's all I've ever done. I just freeze. And she said, I just don't know what else I can do. So we just explored that a little bit. I just very slowly started to walk towards her as if I was that steam train. And we could notice what was coming up for her. And she literally was. It was like kind of deer in the headlights, absolutely frozen. And then be able to sort of say, well, what could those possibilities be? And the very first thing she did was just step out of the line. And that was it. And at that point, her entire nervous system, and the tears came, but the deep breath. And she said, I had never knew that was a possibility that I could do. And then we continued, because actually then it was like, from my perspective, my nervous system was going, okay, that's fine for you, but now I feel lost. I haven't got anything to be able to put that energy. So she was able to learn that she could come around alongside me, so she could be with me, because that's what our children's nervous systems need. It doesn't matter, how challenging the behavior is, I am still there with you. What that looks like might be different, but I will always be alongside you in that way, with my hand at your back. And for her to be able to actually experience what that was like, she would never have got to that piece if that wasn't an embodied experience for her. So basic principles of embodied learning for anything here, right? We slow things down, we create new possibilities, give support, make realistic simulators, but are still safe simulators where they're not in the midst of life where there's real consequences, and then give people next stage, I imagine you did, give people practices to build behaviors, right? That's the basic sort of and explore what that might look like on a more concrete, practical level. But she actually felt that she didn't even necessarily need to go beyond that, because she just felt, well, I can work that bit out for myself. But now I know that. Now I know how I have that possibility. It's just landed in there, and she knows that she'll never not be able to unknow it.
Yeah, and it's, as I say, completely a new possibility opens. Now, you talk about a couple of things I think are worth coming back to. One is shame. So, and the second one, I want to come into attachment theory, because you talked about that quite a bit, and it's not something I know a lot about, and it seems to be, a lot of people talk about trauma, but attachment comes with it.
Yeah, it does.
Maybe before that, a little bit about shame, because so many of the parents I know are kind of giving themselves a hard time, or they're shaming themselves or being shamed for one reason or another. Like, what's that about?
Partly it's because that is our culture. We really do live in this incredible shame-driven culture, and we are, hands up, I'm a shamer. I shame my children a lot, even if I don't mean to. Just the words that come out, the way that we discipline our children, there's a huge amount of shame that's just present. So we often don't even know how we're contributing to that in ourselves. Shame can, there's different types of shame as well, but because shame can start really early developmentally. It's related to shame and rage as well, which is why I get really interested in it. And that's often what's coming up for us as well. There's often the kind of, why we get reactive and defensive with our children and get into that rage situation, because the shame is often connected to that piece. So there's an early developmental piece about shame. There's that protest as a baby where you're wanting to, get your needs met. So you're going to be raging to get your mother's attention. And then if that need is not met, if your caretaker is not consistently coming to you and being able to, regulate and calm and soothe and reflect back to you, then the baby will go into collapse and will go into the sense of maybe, worthlessness. I'm not worth being taken care of. And so there's very much that kind of early sense of, I'm not worthy coming into that. As we go into the second year, we start putting the limits in. And if we've had that good, consistent parenting, that's great. We tend to be able to just, it's very pro-social shame. It's actually, we don't want to be getting rid of it. We don't want to be sort of suppressing it, because there's a reason for it to be there. It's very pro-social. It keeps us, it's about belonging. And that's where the parenting piece, I think, will come in if I get there in a minute. So it's about staying, having our behaviour limited in such a way that we can stay connected to the tribe. So we're not doing anything dangerous that's going to affect our tribe or anything like that. So it's great. Where it becomes problematic is if we don't get back into repair quickly, and that becomes a problem, I think, with parents. It was certainly a problem for me, was that, if I would get rageful with my child, I'd be able to forgive him quite quickly, but I would get lost in this huge shame spiral about,
I'm a bad mother, I'm awful.
How dare I do this? And I shouldn't, parent him if I'm going to, it's a big shame spiral. And the problem with that is that it stops me getting back into repair. And it's not, this whole thing about the calm parenting, it's attachment and parenting. It's not about being, we actually only need to be attuned to our kids about 30% of the time. Because the main stuff, it's all about the ups and the downs. It's helping to build that resilient nervous system that, you can leave, but you come back because, I'm worthy of your love and your care. So it's in that swift repair that the attachment is built and a healthy nervous system and healthy relationship template is built. So it's not about being, and I think understanding that for some parents can help to reduce that shame a little bit too. You don't have
to be a saint the whole time, right? I actually think kind of trainers, coaches, yoga people are actually more prone to this, because there's this sense of like, well, I should be even calmer because I'm a yoga teacher, or because I'm a coach, or because I know embodied leadership. They can actually add to that sort of story of having to be perfectly zen the whole time.
Yes, exactly that. So it's about getting back into that. It's about also our children can download shame onto us as well. They're very good. It's uncomfortable. It's painful for them, and shame elicits shame. So we do need to be quite aware of what's going on. But what is us and what is our stuff and what our child's stuff. That's why embodied work again is so beautiful. That capacity to be able to track and track myself and track what's going on for my child. Not and I think again it's the whole calm parenting thing. We actually do want to take on some of our children's mess and chaos. We don't want to be necessarily getting them to be calm, and we want to be able to internalize their stuff and to be able to process it for them so it can be mirrored and we can model what to do with that feeling. And then so they, it could be able to be given back to them. But that really does mean that we need to think about what our seat is and who we are here. So that doesn't get too messy, because as we said at the beginning, those nervous systems that are merging and the limbic resonance kind of moving in and out all the time, it works both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, at the risk of upsetting a few listeners, pretty much every parent I've ever met, I would classify as codependent with their children. Like there's absolute sort of merging and not knowing whose emotions who, and the more empathic ones that do counselling and things seem to suffer from that more, if anything.
Yeah.
Using themselves with their children and those pieces are just point listeners to, we did a whole podcast episode on shame, actually. I think it was Marcella Widrig, who's a trauma therapist that looks at shame, particularly the whole episode on that. And what about this attachment issues then? So most people have heard the term, but let's start at the complete begin, insecure attachment. What does it mean, attachment?
Yeah. So attachment, I think, has really evolved in order for us to keep to keep our children safe. So it's that reciprocal thing, so that we can keep our children, close to us to keep them safe. And from a child's perspective, it's extremely dangerous if they don't keep their caregiver close to them. So there is a sense that actually a lot of these patterns have come out from the fact the dark shadow mother, or the fact that actually in times of lack of resources and in war times or all that kind of stuff, there is a sense that there is the potential that the mother will abandon the child.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about that very much, but there is still.
It's a huge taboo, isn't it? That's an absolutely huge taboo in society. The idea that a mother may have her own needs and may even at times put her own needs ahead of a child. That's absolutely taboo. That this idea of the saintly mother is a huge one. And I'm even doing this podcast, I'm really aware that if I say anything that could be misconstrued against parents, but especially mothers, woe betide, Mark. In a world of shit if I say anything other than mothers are saints.
Well, we forget that we've got these animal drives and all these instincts and like rage, and they are there for a purpose. And it is to help. It's a huge survival drive, and if we didn't have those things, we're just gonna not survive.
So the sort of over-caring parent or the sort of, I guess we're evolutionary designed to be a little bit clingy in a way, because that's better than the opposite way around, right? Better to have parents be a little clingy than parents who are sort of a bit like, whatever, the child's putting a fork in the electricity socket, never mind. Yeah. You know what I mean? There's a sort of overprotective, there's over-clinginess that's built in as a survival function.
Yeah, there is. And also you can see where sibling rivalry comes in there as well, because if there's a chance that you're going to be abandoned through lack of resources from the parent, then there is that's why it can get quite ferocious, I think.
I've definitely seen children talk about and even plan the death of their siblings in quite serious ways. Yeah. And we forget with this view of children, they're somehow sort of morally beautiful underneath, which in one way is true, but in another way is, they're not socialized. They're monsters in another way. Yeah. So attachment horrific things in children.
It's designed to keep this relationship, to keep the caregiver close to me, and we also know now actually it's very much related to the regulatory system as well. But then we think about these patterns of, there used to be called sort of attachment styles, and there's this idea, there's the secure attachment style and there are insecure styles, but that already starts to feel that there's something pathological about that, whereas actually they're adaptive.
Let's talk about cats and dogs. So I've had girlfriends that were like cats that would just sort of wander off and do their own thing and wouldn't be needy, but they wouldn't necessarily be very affectionate either. Yeah. And then I had others that were like dogs.
That would be an avoidant.
That's avoidant. So the dog is the sort of insecure attachment, right? So the dog would be the girlfriend or the friend. It could be anything, right? Any kind of relationship where they're sort of constantly needing, tell me I'm good, stroke me, I need to be around you.
Anxious.
That's an anxious style. Okay, so this so we covered two in kinds of, so cats are the more, let's do all the animals. So cats are the more avoidant, the anxious. What are the others then?
You've got secure. So that's what you're kind of working towards. If your parents are available and they're attuned and they're consistent in their caregiving, then you get this sense that, I'm worthy of care. My belief is that my needs will be met. These things go through the lifespan pretty much, which is why they're quite interesting.
So you develop this as a child, is the idea of the theory, based on how your parents are or based on just some genetic freak?
It's kind of both, because there's a genetic thing that's going to impact on how, if you're a tricky, difficult baby and you're a fussy baby, and you're difficult, then that might push mum into more of.
And there's gradations, right? Like I don't think I've ever had a partner who's completely secure in their attachment. Like that would all. I mean,
Yeah,
it's very impressive when you meet someone that's very secure, but it's almost freakish.
Yeah, it is. Well, yeah, so there might be something
so rare
on the surface, but also we can have different attachment styles to different people as well.
Oh, so you could be like one way with men, another way with female friends, and another way with...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that, you know, there tends to be one. What you're really looking at with attachment, you know, what tends to happen when you're under pressure, you know, or if rejection or something like that. And so, and, you know, in a sense, with the secure is the fact that you can be both comfortable being alone and comfortable in partnership.
Yeah,
you know, you can move between those two things. And then you've got the avoidant. You know, in terms of music, that would be like songs like I Am a Rock, I Am an Island, or I Did It My Way, or something.
I kind of need anyone to, you know, I'm not a social creature.
Yeah, so because the parents maybe been often disengaged or unavailable or rejecting, then you know, they learn that I don't expect my need to be met, so I may as well stop asking for it. And I don't need, you know...
Yeah, fuck you anyway. Okay,
fuck you anyway. I don't need...
Avoidant. There's avoidant. There's the insecure, which is the child or the intimate partner, because it plays out sort of the same, right? Like I'm just opening this out to a wider audience in a way. That's the sort of insecure, constantly needing to be reassured that they're good and that mum's still there and mum still loves them. Any others? Yeah. There's a couple more.
Well, there's disorganized, which is the chaotic. That's the kind of you know, the parents being much more frightening. It's, you know, it's like, you know, come here, go away, or, you know, they don't.
Is that the I love you, I hate you girlfriend? Is that the sort of I want to be around you? No, I don't. I want space.
Yeah, and you can't.
They're the worst. They're the absolute worst.
Yeah, that's what it's. Yeah, it's more disorganized. So that, yeah, and they can be a bit indiscriminate and all that kind of stuff, you know, and so they're quite it's quite useful to. And the thing that what's important about attachment as well is that in terms of long-term resilience, it's a protective factor for, you know, future PTSD or future trauma, because as we know, the trauma is not necessarily in the event itself, but the more securely attached on that spectrum that somebody is, the, you know, the more likely that they will be able to move through traumas without, you know, suffering from the PTSD piece. So it's a protective. It really is.
It's protective as well. So when something goes wrong, you still have this sense like, hey, the universe is not entirely broken. There's still some place I can get love out there, even if this really bad thing has just happened. Because it is a mystery, right? Why 50% of people who are raped, for example, get PTSD and 50% don't. Even though men, you know, nearly all of them would develop some trauma symptoms. Like,
well, yeah, well, I don't know if it is
some people.
I think there is quite a lot of the kind of, you know, evidence suggesting that, you know, the more secure and, you know, in terms of the relationship, and obviously having more supports and the regulation again, because you know, even your set point, if you're more securely attached, your set point cortisol level is different. You know, your baseline is different. You're waking up, if you're insecure in a different way, you're waking up and you're already seeing the world as a threat.
The same for addicts. I wake up every morning full of cortisol and adrenaline. That's just the way I'm wired. I think it's entirely genetic. I do early morning meetings with other alcohol and drug addicts. You know, I'm 11 years sober, so mine, that base level's way better than what it was. But I tell you what, it ain't where my wife's is first thing in the morning before we have a coffee. And I think that's purely genetic from what I can tell. And there's, you know, like I've done the trauma work. Some people seem to be set at different levels. And then there's just lifestyle factors. Like I feel like we are centering junkies because we know all the self-regulation tips, right? The centering techniques from Wendy and Paul and all the rest of it. Like Paul Linden, by the way, in case when people want to look up that podcast, good on this stuff. We actually underestimate just like how busy I am. Or whether I was in London at the weekend, my base rate for stress is way different when I'm in London than when I'm in Brighton, just because it's a different environment. Like the people.
When I moved out of London, I found Brighton so hard because it's just like, oh my God, people will just sit around for hours at coffee shops. I mean, God, don't I just want to go out and do
So you were wired for London? You were finding that? I know we have a lot of listeners in London, so I'd just like to say, fuck London. No, I just way more stressed there. And it's same in New York and Moscow and Tel Aviv and there's other cities. You know, it's not just those stressful big cities. I don't think we talk enough about this just baseline levels of sort of stress and cortisol and stuff, right? Because all the centering techniques in the world are only needed if that you jump up to a certain point.
Yes. Yeah. But of course, regulation is not about just bringing it down. It's about bringing it up as well.
Yeah.
Or, you know, and again, that's why we get into that self-regulation piece again and trying to calm children down. And sometimes if you haven't, you know, well, one is that a lot of children actually, you know, they need to be stimulated to get out of more of a freeze kind of state. But also, because if you're not taking care of that, why they're in that place in the first place, they're just going to ping back up. Got it. You know, if there's a need to be, it's the same with parents as well. When we're kind of stressed out, you can't, it's not like a relaxation muscle that you can kind of switch on. If there's a need, if I think that my child is going to be setting fire to the curtains when I'm out, you know, then there's a reason that I am hypervigilant and I'm up there. So same with the kids. If they're not feeling safe within their environments or within that relationship, you can be doing all those activities in the world to try and bring them down, but it's not going to feel safe to them. Their system, it will come down. And it will go, oh, this is no good because I've got to be on the lookout for threat.
Yeah, sure. I get it.
Straight up there.
So, Kirstie, we're moving towards close, unbelievably. So I want to do a last thing before we go into kind of, you know, where can people find out more and stuff like that. And obviously, you know, parenting, I've said it before, I've said it again, it's obviously a very easy job. But, you know, top tips for parents from an embodied point of view. I know it's a deep, long-term embodiment process, but for people out there, they're listening, you know, maybe like my sister, they're just struggling a little bit. What are your top tips to help people out?
One, there are certain things that will be really helpful anyway on a point of view of accepting everything that comes up and not wanting to kind of suppress it or push it down or any of those things. Being able to, it's being okay with the mess and the anger and needing to be a protective presence. I think a lot of people often come with the wrong question, which is, how can I feel more powerful so that I can not be so impacted by my children's behaviours, rather than feeling, you know, rather than think of how do I protect myself from my children's behaviours? And what we're really looking at is how can we build our own sense of power and protectiveness and resourcefulness so we can protect children from themselves, from their trauma, or from those sorts of pieces. So there's that piece about working on our own capacity to our own sense of dignity, our own sense of belonging. I think some of it is about what matters to me more. Okay, so this will be the piece that I'll leave that one with. What matters to me more beyond this situation and beyond this behavior? So that is what I am going to orientate myself around when that, you know, whatever's going on in that behavior, because that's the shame piece as well, is when I start acting in opposition to my own values and my own kind of, you know, idea of myself as a parent. And so it's about reclaiming that sense of self-agency. You know, I judge myself around what I've been able to do at the end of the day, not what my child can do. We need to be able to separate those things. So it's about accountability. What am I prepared to be accountable for? I might be responsible for supporting my child with their behaviour. That doesn't mean I need to take accountability for it. But I can be accountable for how I respond in those situations. So it'd be really, really helpful to put in a kind of a declaration of care around, what is more important for me in my world and my life. That, in this moment, in this behaviour, it might be that, I uphold dignity for myself and my child, no matter what. And then, that's what we drop into when we're, there's lots of pieces around that.
This in itself is a form of centering. I mean, Strozzi does a lot of work on this, that, it's kind of reconnecting to core values, what's most meaningful, what's my orientating principle. And that has a way of creating perspective and calming us down and stopping us behaving ways that are kind of against that, right?
Yeah. So, and that's the thing, is that, what is it that we can do that can keep our own safe social engagement systems on, to keep us in that nice, regulated state. And, that is a really powerful piece, which doesn't necessarily need all the embodiment piece as well. If you bring that in, that's even more powerful. Yeah. In terms of, there's all this spinning, there's all this behavior, there's all this sort of explosive stuff that's going on in the room with you. And what is it that you're going to choose to organise around? Are you going to organise around the children's behaviour, or are you going to, make that other piece more important? And it's much more powerful than the 3 deep breaths. It's kind of that 3 deep, going to take 3 deep breaths, pause, 3 deep breaths. But in those 3 deep breaths, I'm not changing my perspective. I'm not, I'm still got my jaw clamped. I'm still moving in, and the child is still just getting that wham of my defensive behavior. Yeah. That's what we're looking at. It's not calm behavior, but we just don't want to switch our defense behaviors on. And that is different. I can still be emotional, because I can be safe with all my emotions, and we want that. But it's then about taking that self-agency about what is it that, that's where I'm going to find my anchor. So what am I going to anchor myself around that I am going to make more important than this behavior, than this moment? Keep me connected to the bigger picture rather than that narrow thinking that happens when we're under stress.
Great. And I know you're on a time frame here. So is there any other things, just bullet points, that you always end up saying to parents? Obviously my advice is Durex, morning after pill, contraceptive pill. But are there any other sort of really good?
It's about you'll often hear one of the things about being connection before correction. And that's quite a common thing that you hear. But from my point of view, it's safety and trust and regulation before connection, and then go into the correction. Because in the same way that there's no point correcting if you don't have the relationship, you don't have the relationship unless you have the regulation on board. And then you're building that trust. So it's all about building the trust, being congruent with your behaviours, which again, why that declaration is really helpful, and being authentic. So, being able to just talk as you're going along, talking to you. So we're not trying to suppress the emotions. We can be
Children hate inauthenticity, don't they? Children are the best bullshit detectors I've found over the years. If I was even a little bit off, I was using a technique or a trick, even a half intelligent 8-year-old would just go, "What's all that nonsense?" They really hate it.
Yeah. So if we can literally narrate, which we'll often do with our child, but if we narrate for us, and this is going on for me now. And I'm starting to feel this, and this is coming up, and whoa. So do you know what? When I'm like this is what helps me. This is what I'm going to do, and do it. So you're regulating yourself, but you're modeling that. Because the whole point of calm parenting means that if you're not calm, every other emotion becomes wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the dangers of sort of mindfulness movement, and us being given this image of, they say in religion there's 2 images and both are necessary. One is the Buddha and the other is the Christ being crucified. Yeah, and they're sort of both kind of inspiring images in different ways.
Yeah, but, so trust, authenticity, safety, which can be different kids, then connection, and then the correction piece.
Got it. That is beautiful. Final message about the body for our listeners?
So I will borrow from Richard Swartz, who's the internal family systems person, which is that sense, particularly when it comes with for our children, which is that sense of all of you is welcome here.
All of you is welcome here. Nice.
Of you. All your parts is welcome here.
And I'm just looking on your website, which is KirstieSeabourne.com, which is spelled KIRSTIE Seabourne, SEABORNE.com. Is that right?
Yeah, there's also embodiedparents.com as well.
Great. I'll get that one on the website. And on there, there's all sorts of tests and things, aren't there? Like, compassion fatigue self-test and vicarious trauma test and things like that. So there's things that people can, can really look at there as well.
There are. Yeah. And I'll be updating and putting up a schedule for the next 6 months training courses as well. I'll do that over the next week or so. Lovely.
Kirstie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It was a real joy.
Subscribe to get more. And you can also leave us a review on iTunes, which helps with our rankings. So really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support the podcast even more, then fund us. Go to Patreon. Give us $1 per episode. Those who don't know, Patreon's a really good way of supporting things you want to see more of in the world. I know so much is available for free now, and what I'd say is a lot of energy and effort goes into this podcast. I put it out there for free so everyone can get it. Maud and I work on this. Everyone that wants it can have it for free. And if you want to support us, it is really appreciated. So it's patreon.com/Mark Walsh. And of course, if you want any in-person training, you can visit embodiedfacilitator.com. There's loads more resources there too.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.